everybody. This is actually a prelude to the real episode because I filmed this way before RE9 actually ended up coming out, but just about everything I said was really relevant to the exact issue at hand. And also I was very close to my guesses for RE9. So if for whatever reason you haven't played RE9 yet, I have to tell you now, technically, it's kind of spoilery because I was guessing a whole lot of stuff as to what I thought they should have done. And we were this close to perfection. But anyway, enjoy the episode.
Hey everybody, Invisiblekatana here, and today I would like to discuss if Resident Evil needs a new big bad. Of course, we've had one, and he was great, and that was Wesker. Wesker was really cool. He was super cool in Code Veronica, and then of course he became like the big bad officially in RE5, and also he was done in RE5, but he was the overarching villain. Like, he gets to pop up, you know, they do little retcons to stuff, so it's like, oh, he kidnapped this person, and he took this person, and he did this and did that. So he was our guy. He was the dude until he was dead in a volcano. Like, he ain't coming back. But he does have a kid, and also he has a sister. And his sister got to be an enemy, and of course, I'm gonna talk about Revelations 2. If you have not played Revelations 2, and you haven't heard people constantly say like, man, Revelations, when RE9 was like somewhat Revelations 3, there was all sorts of conversation. So if you're watching this, you probably already heard it, but for anyone that might just be coming across it, who just skipped over Revelations 2, or you might not know the specific details at the very least, you probably heard people reference it, but you don't know the details. In Revelations 2, we end up fighting against Wesker's sister, Alex Wesker. If you play Resistance, she's one of the masterminds in it. From during RE3 remake era, in Resistance, she's one of the masterminds. So Alex Wesker, her whole thing was like, all right, my brother was doing his thing where he's like the pinnacle of mankind, like he's got superpowers, this, that, and the other. And she was more like, I'm gonna refine myself to live forever. And her way of doing it was by making clones and putting her, basically almost doing like the digitized thing where you put your mind into a computer, except she was like, no, I'll just make clones and then I'll just be young forever. I'll just keep popping them out, and then I'll, boom, fresh body, same mind over and over and over again. And of course you go through the process, you do your thing, you beat the villain, all that jazz. And then the end of the game hits, and Natalia, who is the little girl that Barry has been helping out through the whole campaign, is one of the clones. But you think everything's cool. For like that was kind of like the whole point, was like, oh, she's like kind of one of the clones, but everything's okay. And then the very end of the game, she's reading this book, some, classic thing, she was reading a book and it was like some like dark evil quote or whatever, and there's a little smirk, and then boom, that's the end of Revelations 2. So the whole thing has been that Natalia, and this is over a decade now, Natalia is the clone of Alex Wesker, and she clearly has those elements within her. It might not be 100%. I think if anything, when Natalia does eventually come back, I think they're gonna do like a split personality deal where she's trying to fight against the influence of Alex as an adult. So I think that's how they're gonna do it, but she's still gonna have that influence. Like, there are gonna be elements of her that kind of force her to turn dark. Like, she literally has a dark Natalia in the game. Like, that was kind of like the whole thing, is that there's a dark version of her. So we'll see, hopefully. Like, honestly, that's just one of those things where I'm like, you think they would have jumped on that within the last 10 years instead of being like, what if with 7 they had to do some reboot stuff, so I'll give them that. I'll give them 7, and it's like, hey, you had to save yourself, so they, it's okay. 7 I'll give a pass, but it's like, it's somewhere in there, even if they didn't transfer it, because it should be one of those things that's like main timeline wise. Even without that, like an actual Revelations 3 picking up on it within 10 years, you think they would have, like, I've mentioned this before, but it's just gold. It's gold right there. And they can just reach out. It's golden low-hanging fruit, and they just won't grab it. We'll see what happens going forward, but that is kind of like our one in so far. It's kind of the easy in as far as a new big bad villain. And other than that, they would have to introduce someone new, which I don't think would be much of an issue. Like, one of the crazy things about Resident Evil is that they just make villains and then they all die off. I think the only person that hasn't died was the son from RE7, because he was like never infected or anything like that, and he just ends up being arrested. But I also don't think he'll end up coming back. Like, he's been arrested, and it's like, okay, he'll do like, he's crazy enough that is like, like I don't think it'll really be much of a thing. It could happen, if they did it, it would be like, okay, he found, somebody broke him out of prison or whatever, because they're like, hey, you're insane, you were with the mold, you dealt with all this, that, and the other, and you had connections with somebody, I don't remember who it was, but maybe it was explained, maybe it wasn't. RE7 and 8 like to just drop new content, so I don't even remember if they actually went into detail about it. But the point is, he could come back, since he's technically alive. But I do think that we could use another big bad villain. I don't think it would be an issue if they made a game, and all they would have to do is just make a game with 2 villains, and then you just kill one of them, and then the other's like, oh, all right, well, I'm gonna refine this thing that failed this time, and then I'll just be back a little bit later. Like, there are other characters out there that are doing like spy stuff, and Ada's always talking to somebody. You never really know if it's just Wesker / Umbrella or who she's dealing with. So there's always like somebody out there. Obviously, there's the connection. So we have groups that already exist to be like, hey, here's the next big bad. Who knows? You know, the BSAA is like doing its own thing, and that's super weird. So they could just straight up be villains as well going forward if they want to do it that way, or you know, it's like kind of conflicting where like some people are like, yeah, we should do it this way, and other people are like, we definitely shouldn't because it's BOWs. So they could have that where it's like kind of the philosophical element that people are arguing and stuff, and then the connections could just be straight up bad guys. We could get someone where it's like, hey, this person is a part of this organization. They don't even have to be like the head of the organization. If anything, they shouldn't be the head of it. That'll allow, you know, much like Umbrella, you can make the connections like the next thing, because once again, we have no effing lore, they're just the connections. So they could be the next big bad. You introduce, you know, some generals or whatever, like some people that do some stuff and they're important here, there, and then that's really about it. Like, and who knows? We might get some content when it comes to RE9. They could reference the connections. I think personally they really should, just to be like, hey, first off, we need to know who they really are because they dropped that on us and then nothing. Much like the BSAA thing in RE8 where it was like, oh, okay. And then we'll see if that gets answered. But they can do that. Just make the connections to the new Umbrella. You throw in, I mean, honestly, when it comes to Umbrella, at this point, I'm considering them done. I don't care if it's like a blue Umbrella, Neo Umbrella, all that crap. Like, no, Umbrella is dead. Like, they've killed everybody. Spencer is straight up dead. Wesker is dead. Like, you can let Umbrella just be gone officially, and it's like, okay, that's fine. Like, in all honesty, once again, this would kind of help with the actual progression of the franchise where, like, you know, because they said Umbrella was dead before, then it was like, oh, it's actually Tricell now, which was a cool thing. I thought that was sick. You know, that was amazing. And of course, you can say the connections if they want to do it this way. Those are other people that actually went from Umbrella and then they did that, or the connections could be like a collective of groups or something. But I personally believe we do need like a face to the villainy, and not just the connections. I think the connection would be cool. I do want it to be layered though. I want it to be like Umbrella had Wesker, and Wesker also kind of had his own thing eventually because he was trying to just be out on top. But you can have someone where it's like they work for the connections. This is what's going on because of the connections. These are the things that they're causing out in the world. You know, bioterrorism, BOWs, and some new strain that rhymes with the T virus. Maybe they'll make the Z virus next. And then it's like, okay, that's cool. And then we have someone that works for them. And then, or we can have 2 people. Like I said, you can have the whole company and just have 2 people that are just like, they're important enough to be doing this mission. You kill one of them, the other person's like, oh, that didn't work. Let me report back to my company. But now that I've actually experienced, you know, because at this point, we got to be honest, the connections in any other company has to know who, at the very least, Jill and Chris are, right? Like at this point, they have to be like, okay, here are like the 4 people that are, you know, that might be effing us over. Chris Redfield, Claire Redfield, Jill Valentine, and Leon Kennedy. Leon S. Kennedy. It feels weird not to say the S, but those are like the 4 people, right? At this point, they have to basically just be like on a ban list where it's like, do not communicate with them, shoot them on sight. They stop all BOW attacks. We need to just like, let's deal with them. So they have to know who they are at this point. It's been literally decades. Every bioterrorist organization has to have heard of it. They have to be the people where it's like, oh, your reputation precedes you. Especially Leon, because of the fact that he literally worked like straight under the president. So he'd probably be like #1 for that. But then it's like, you're not gonna not know who Chris and Jill are as founders of the BSAA. Like they're gonna know that organization, and they're gonna be like, we know who the heads are. So they're gonna know that stuff. Claire might be the only one that's kind of out because she does like more of her reporting stuff and like her terror save deal and all that. It's like, okay, you know, her name might not be on the list 100%, but it would probably be there because once again, Chris Redfield. So these organizations have to know who these people are. They have to understand what they're dealing with. They have to know, okay, someone who hadn't interacted with them personally finally does. You kill off one of their buddies. They're like, okay, these people are actually pretty good at their job. You know, wouldn't have known that from the decades of success they had, but they're pretty good at their jobs. They killed my buddy. I report back to the connections. Then that character gets to come back multiple times. and just do like 2 or 3 games. Like they could have characters come in or just have multiple faces to the connections. I think that would work. Like I said, you could start with just 2 people, and then as you go through, you have the one person that keeps surviving, or maybe they don't even have to be in the next game. Maybe they could be referenced where it's like, oh yeah, they're off doing this thing, but now I'm here. And so you have another person, and then you could kill that person off. They could pop up as a one-off or something like that. Then you go back to the person that survived, and then they could survive again or something like that. Like I feel like they need a consistent overarching villain, and they need to just start doing arcs. Like I love, one of the things that can be fun about the games is that because we don't get teased as far as like aside from the fact that they just drop random stuff like the connections or the BSAA stuff, the games tend to be singular, where you can play that one game and then the story's wrapped up. That's about it. Like they're one and done, and you're good to go. And you can have like your little references. They don't normally end on like straight up cliffhangers, like this is the first part of an arc. And I think you can still do that. Like even when it comes to Wesker, which I've said this a million times now, but I'm hoping that the remake of Code Veronica is what we're getting next instead of the remake of 5, because it goes appearance in 4, side antagonist in Code Veronica, and then main antagonist in 5. So it makes sense for that to be the transition and like the growth of his arc, where he's just kind of doing some wild stuff on the side when it comes to Code Veronica. He's picking up a few pieces, and then it's like, now I figured it out. Boom, RE5. They could just do that again. Do a couple games where the stories are singular, but you can have a character pop up more and more as the games progress. And it's like, okay, that's the overarching story, but you don't feel like you're missing anything. You don't feel like it's left out because that character doesn't, do like their ultimate plan, or they don't get killed off in the game. You still feel satisfied, where it's like, all right, RE4 is kind of a perfect example, especially if you do the Separate Ways DLC. It's like, okay, Wesker literally shows up on there. Like he's more involved in the remake than he was in the original, but it's still just like, all right, it's a nice little introduction. He has a Krauser's body at the end. It's like, all right, he's moving forward. But I don't feel like it's a horrible tease. He was barely involved, but he was there. But you got RE4's like the story that it is. Code Veronica comes in, he's still doing some more stuff. He's over there. He's a little bit closer because, he'd probably start kicking people and socking Chris in the face. But he's a little bit closer. But he's still not the main dude. You're still dealing with Alfred and Alexia Ashford. So you're still dealing with their thing as the main plot of the game. And then Wesker is also there to just kind of cause a bit of chaos when he can. RE5 drops in, boom. He's the guy. He has other people with him and everything. He had like 3 other people, including Jill, as like the mystery character. So it was him as the main villain, and then like 3 other characters in the game that he kind of had as like his little crew. It's like that's how you do it. You wipe all of them out, and then you kill. Obviously, you save Jill, but then you kill Wesker at the end. It's like, okay, that's pretty cool. That's satisfying. It sucked that it was Wesker that died, because Wesker was just so cool. But it was also like, holy crap, they killed. That's a big deal. We definitely need somebody that's a consistent villain to come into the fold. Actually, now that I think about it, no, the dude from 6 definitely died. He fell on the spike, and then his blood made the umbrella symbol area. He's definitely dead. Dinosaur guy, he's gone. But other than that, everybody does tend to die. Like they're kind of like the MCU, where it's like they'll bring in a villain. It's like, this is not, well, for Resident Evil, I can't really say there are too many villains where I'm like, I like that villain. Alex is a great villain, which is why they need to do the Natalia stuff. She was actually pretty cool, and also the fact that it even tied to Wesker was like, oh, it's the part of the Wesker kids, which they could touch on that in general if they wanted to just throw in another child. For anyone that doesn't know this, Wesker was like an orphan and all that stuff. Like his siblings are like, they're all just called Wesker, like that they're all just like orphans that were picked up and stuff. So that was kind of like their thing. So if they wanted to, they could introduce somebody else, because it was kind of crazy that they introduced her, because it was really just like Wesker was just by himself the whole time, and then they just threw her in, and it was like, hey, Alex Wesker, his sister, and I was like, oh, that's really cool. So they've already done it once. They could touch on it again with a brand new character, or finally just go back to Natalia, have some stuff with Alex, and like figure that junk out, because man, it's driving me nuts. And I know I'm not the only person, but we need something. We need something. But as a whole, I do think we need another big bad villain, and I think they could do it even if it wasn't like kind of a Wesker situation where you have the face or a face from the company to be like, oh, it's this person that shows up over and over again. Even if they put more ties to the connections, where it was like, oh, this person is kind of doing their own thing, but it's tied to the connections. Technically, kind of like Mia, where it was like, She was doing a mission for the Connections, but the story of that game is how things went wrong. The Connections was just kind of like the side element / reveal as to kind of like the background catalyst as to what happened. And that was really it. It was like, okay, the Connections, that's cool. And it would have been cooler if we, once again, got more information as time went on, but we haven't yet. So you can do that where they're off to the side and you just build up this company or, amalgamation. Just because it's called the Connections, I'm kind of like, it should be an amalgamation of things. Somebody from Umbrella is still around trying to do something in there. But I like that idea of just being like, hey, just tie it to this company. Just tie it to the Connections, whatever that means. Tie it to them. What are they doing specifically? Why did they have this kid? Where were they going with the kid? Technically all that stuff is kind of in there, like what their plan really was. But it's like, okay, well now that's failed. It's super failed, going with 8, like the mold is done now. So what's the Connections' next plan? Are they involved with the Elpis stuff? Are they involved in, honestly, what greater story could you have for the Connections being a, we'll say an amalgamation of people and corporations and all that sort of stuff, for them to be like, okay, we failed with the mold, but what if we just went after these kids? Once again, Grace is there, which is why, that's like the main point of her character in this game, or in 9 coming up, is definitely about her blood, because she has the next generation, we'll call it, of the Daylight vaccine from Outbreak, because her mom obviously took it. You have Sherry, you have Jake, obviously, next generation, infected with the G virus. I guess for Jake, it's just in general, whatever, combination of things when it comes to Wesker. I guess technically it was just the T virus, but, he adapted to it because of how it happened with him being infected mostly through the Tyrant. I can't remember the exact details of how they did it, but that was, his specific, mutation. It's like, okay, that transferred to his son. That's why he has enhanced strength and all that jazz. But his blood is definitely special. That was also literally the point of his, that storyline in 6, where Sherry was like, hey, I came to find you because your blood is literally a cure for the C virus. So there's a lot there where it's like, hey, you got the next generation, most of which are literally just kids that have straight up cures for some sort of disease or some form of immunity, or also, in the context of, we'll see what happens with Grace. I think she'll be the most normal, but with Jake and Sherry, they literally come out with straight up superpowers. Jake has like enhanced strength and stuff, and Sherry can just get stabbed like crazy and just be like, I'm good. I just got to heal a little bit. So she's out there walking around like Wolverine and Deadpool, and Jake's out there like Captain America. So it's like, okay, like there's stuff that you can do with that. Why not have the Connections go after these kids that are the lineage of Umbrella and like the beginning of all this absolute chaos? It seems very simple. Once again, low-hanging fruit, but in the best way. So it seems really crazy that they haven't touched on that. And once again, I'm really hoping, obviously I've said it a million times, I'm trying not to be just stupid about it and hope way too much for RE9 as far as just plot lines and story progression of like just the actual universe as a whole, and not just it'll be good. Like I think the story of 9 is going to be fun, but if they do something where at the very least if they say the Connections, I'll be happy. Honestly, if they just drop it in there, like, yeah, the dude that kidnapped Grace, maybe he had former connections or former ties to the Connections. I can't say former connections to the Connections, but former ties to them or something like that, I'll be happy. It'll at least be a reference. It'll at least be acknowledgement that they don't just keep dropping stuff literally in the last 10 minutes of like the games, and then it's like, we'll see it when we see it. Because I don't think we're getting the BSAA thing. But if we can at least go back to 7 and get the Connections, I'll be happy. I'm like, all right, you know what? It took you till 9 to deal with the plot you dropped in 7. If it takes us until 10 to get the plot you dropped in 8, then okay. And honestly, just because they could be like Resident Evil X or something crazy, you're like, okay, if that's where they put Chris in jail and it's like the 10th numbered game, I'll give it to them. I will give it to them if they do that for us. I'll let them have it. It's like, okay, you know what? Something, you know how we are with numbers. It's just like 10 is super special, even though it'll be like the 8,000th game from Resident Evil. But still, numbered wise, it'll be like, it's only 10. It's only 10, so it feels nice and special. So we'll see what happens with that. But I think we need a big bad. I would love to know your thoughts on this. Like, who should it be? How should they handle it? I don't know if Natalia would ever become like a straight up villain. I always felt like that would be like one solid game, because they would end up saving her or straight up killing her. Or if they did, honestly, I'm a sucker for a dark story. If they straight up made it where they could not save her and then she does straight up become like the big bad, honestly, I would applaud it, because I'm like, you don't normally see that where they take the darker route. Like, yeah, they just couldn't do it. Like, oh, you know, hey, mind control. What can you do? Or, you know, like that's about it. So if they took that route, that would be pretty nuts. But I would certainly applaud it for just taking a bold step of being like, yeah, that kid you rescued and like helped through an entire game is Barry, and they form like a really nice bond. You know, she's living with his family and stuff. She's like the third daughter and everything. It's like, yeah, it didn't work. Like, she turned evil and they got to fight her now. It's like, that's effed up. But man, I would love that storyline. It would be dark. I mean, it's Resident Evil. Honestly, it would probably be really cool to have that as a part of like the main story, because most of the dark stuff that happens that we truly experience is like, okay, the darkest stuff happens to all the bad guys. Like, you know, well, technically the dark stuff with Sherry, like, she wasn't bad. She, you know, that really sucked for her, especially both her parents. But most of the stuff that we actually experience is like, oh, that was kind of in the background. Or the orphanage thing is like, you go through the orphanage, but it's not a part of the story. You just read some stuff and it's like, wow, that's crazy. But you see Birkin get killed. You see Spencer get killed. You see, I forgot the Marcus from RE0. Like, you see him get killed and stuff like that. It's always like the bad guys who are behind the company, they suffer. And it's like, okay, you know, outside of Sherry, I think she's really the only innocent person, when you really think about it, that was even affected by that in terms of like the actual plots of the games, where it's like, oh, you see her suffering and it's like, she doesn't really get it 100%, but this is really sad and we understand it. But other than that, it's like most of the games, outside of Piers straight up dying, honestly, he suffered, but most of the games, it's like, oh, well, the bad guys suffer, or they kind of died and then came back, you know, and that's really about it. Like, that's all we ever really see from the suffering in game. Other than that, it's like, okay, all right, you know. RE6, I will say Helena. We can go with Helena, like the madness with her sister and all that stuff. So that counts a little bit. I shouldn't say a little bit. That was effed up. That does count. But most of the time, we don't really see it in game. And we certainly don't see it tied to the main characters, where like someone that they care for is specifically the one that's, you know, suffering or that they just can't save. That would be great. We haven't really had that. Like, Wesker went bad and it was like, you're just the bad guy. But if Natalia went bad, that would be pretty nuts. That would be a great game for Claire. You know, just throw, you know, just to have Claire somewhere in there. That would be a great game for that. But we need a big bad. Personal opinion, of course. Like I said, I would love to know your thoughts on that. But I think we need something. Even if it's not, you know, like I said, not on the level of Wesker, where it's a straight up, this person has a name and has a face that we continue to recognize through like 2 or 3 games. If it's at the very least just the connections. It's just the connections, and then other, you know, the one-off people, but the company, you know, on top is still doing like the really crazy stuff. I'm fine with that too. Like, we gotta have something. So I hope we end up getting a big bad, or at the very least, you know, the connections can become the big bad, even if we don't have like a name or a face to it. They could build that up over time. They could, you know, well, I was gonna say do it with 10, but that's one game away. The connections could be tied to the BSAA thing, if they want to do it that way. They're the connections. We know nothing about them. It's super easy. You can pull a Captain America and just be like, oh, they infiltrated us the whole time. We never knew. And it turned out they were, you know, they were the connections. They had bits and pieces here and there, and they found their way into the BSAA, and that's why they started using BOWs. They claimed that it was so that, you know, we would have less casualties and stuff, but secretly, it was so that they could do even more new experiments and have extra funding to do it. Like, it's super easy. It's money, it's funding, it's a plethora of people. Just seems like an easy end. Just say the connections are the reason that happened with the BSAA. You can still just throw it in. Chris and Jill deal with the BSAA. They find out they're dealing with the connections at the same time. Everybody's effing happy. And then just throw Claire in there just because I really want to see Claire again. But that's all we need. That's all I need. That's all I need. So we'll see what happens going forward. We'll see what happens in 9. Something could happen. We might get the connections. It might be nothing. It might just be this guy, this specific dude. And that could be it. And we will see when RE9 comes out. But I would love to know your thoughts on what should happen in terms of villains for Resident Evil. Do we need a big bad? Does it need to be Wesker style, where it's an actual person that's in the games? Are you good if it's just the connections, as long as they get referenced, because eventually it'll build up to something? I would love to know your thoughts on that. So please put your comments down in the comment section below. And of course, Thanks for watching.